Hey everybody, in this video I'll be showing you how to build a computer. I'll show you how I built my $500 gaming PC, and in the end I'll show you the upgrades I made to make this a $700 gaming machine. Here's what you will need to get yourself started. The case I chose is the Corsair Carbide Spec 01 since this is a good looking case and cheap. The processor is an AMD FX 6300 6-core 3.5 GHz CPU. For my storage I chose to work with a 1TB Western Digital Blue and accompany that with 4 GB of RAM. For the motherboard I chose an MSI 978 G43. My initial graphics card choice was an R7 250X 1GB GDDR5. And for my initial power supply unit I chose a Thermaltake 450W light power. These are the tools I used to help me make this build possible. And also you will be needing the motherboard booklet. This is the booklet provided with the motherboard and it helps you a great deal when making a build. Step 1, I removed the thumb screws holding in the side panel, putting them somewhere safe. And then I just slid off the side panels and did the same build. Next what I did was I removed this little box which was inside my case. In this box there are screws and other small necessities needed to make the build possible. Next, all the cables I found in the case, so what I did was I removed all the cabling, tying them together to make my build easier. Next it's time to prep the motherboard for the CPU. I pulled it out and I put it on top of the box, which gave me a good surface to work on. I then removed the CPU from its own box. Here's where the CPU goes, and since it's an AMD board, it's a little different. All I have to do is lift the lever on the right and I'm ready to put in my CPU. Here I am lifting the lever. And here I am installing the CPU. The CPU should only go in one way. You have to align the little golden arrow on the bottom left of the CPU with the arrow on the motherboard. Once the CPU has been put in, all you have to do is drop the lever and that's it. Next, apply a bit of thermal paste only about pea size on it, which I had already done previously, and then you are ready to install the cooler. It should slide in like so. To install it, you must line up the metal latch with the small plastic pieces which are already on the motherboard. After the latches are firmly been placed, close the lever and it should be done. The last step on installing the CPU cooler is you have to plug it into the board. There should be a port right next to the CPU labeled CPU fan. And the port should only go in one way anyway, so this shouldn't be too difficult. Next, I'll be installing my RAM. I'll be only using one channel. And what I have to do is I have to release the side latches and then bring in my RAM. The RAM only goes in one way, so keep your eye open for the notch on the RAM and the notch on the board. Once you got the fitting right, push in and the latches on the side should close on their own and you should be done here. Next, what I chose to do is install my PSU. I chose to put the fan aiming down the bottom to provide a better airflow. Next, I'm going to come around the back and with the screws provided with the PSU, I'm going to screw it to the case. I used a friend to help me here. You might need to as well. I chose to have someone help me with the build as this was my first build. And if it is the first build for you as well, you might consider having a friend there to help you. Next, I'll be installing the motherboard I/O shield. This is provided with the motherboard and it should fit in like so. It's a little fidgety at first, but once you get it in, you're done. It should pop in like so. Next, I'm ready to put in my motherboard into the case. The motherboard standoffs are already installed for me, so I did not need to worry about that, and if they are not for you, that might be something you might want to invest your time in. There is a longer motherboard standoff in the middle which helped me guide the board in, and that fit in through a screw hole in the middle of the motherboard. Once in, the motherboard should simply fall in and you're ready to screw it in. This particular motherboard had 6 screws, but I only needed to screw in 5 due to the one I'm pointing at now was occupied by the longer motherboard standoff. Once done, the motherboard is installed and you're ready to move on to your next step. Next, I located my PCI Express slot and the bracket adjacent to it, which I had to remove to make room for my graphics card. This is removed via 2 screws, as there are 2 brackets. I also removed the bracket on top to give myself more room to plug in my graphics card. I brought in my graphics card, and this should only go in one way, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Once you locate the correct positioning, a little bit of force should be applied and the graphics card will fall in. Once installed, I came back and used the same screws that were holding in the bracket to screw in my graphics card. I also put on the upper bracket that was on before, once again. Next, I decided to install my storage. I made sure that the cabling was in this direction, so I did not have to route any cables to the front, this would help my cable management, routing the cables to the back. I pulled out a drive caddy and located the 6 holes that are on the hard drive with the 6 protruding pieces on the caddy. Sliding in and a bit of bending on the plastic allows me to put in the hard drive. Next, I slide the caddy back into the drive bay, and it's that easy. Next, I take the provided SATA cables and plug it onto the hard drive and route it through the back of the case. After plugging in the SATA cable to the hard drive, I plug it into the motherboard. My motherboard had 6 and I only need 1 to make this work. Next, what we will be doing is plugging in all the front I/O. This is located on the bottom of my motherboard, and with this, I was a little confused at first, but I did refer to the motherboard booklet, which helped me a great deal in this process. Here I am plugging in the HD audio port. Not only is it written on the motherboard where you should plug these in, but it's also labeled both on the cable itself and on the motherboard. Just following that should give you enough information on where to plug these in. Next, I plugged in my USB. Once again, it was labeled on the port itself and on the plug on the board. This process is pretty straightforward if you know what you're doing. Next, I plugged in the USB 3.0, which is located on this blue connector here and is labeled JUSB4. Next, here are these very small connectors which are for your power button, your power LED, and so on. These are a little fidgety as they are so small. And what I did with this is I referred to my motherboard booklet, and this was a great help with me. Unfortunately, I can't really help you here as it might be different for you and your motherboard. But what I strongly urge you to do is refer to the booklet to help you with this process. Next, I will be plugging in my front mounted fan. This port should be labeled SYST fan and is plugged in. Next, I'll be plugging in all the cables coming out of my power supply. Here's a 24-pin connector which plugs into the motherboard. I routed this out the back to help me with my cable management. As you can see, the 24-pin motherboard connector connects right here. All I have to do is put it in right side on the right direction and it should slide in. To know which way is the correct direction, there should be a plastic piece protruding out both the motherboard and the cable itself. This should indicate the direction it should go in. Next, here is a 6-pin connector giving power to my graphics card. I routed this out the back once more to help me make my cable management much neater. Next in my hand is the 8-pin CPU power. This is plugged in on the top left corner of my board, and since it's so short, I just routed it over my graphics card. Plugging this in will give you power to your CPU. Next, here are my SATA connectors giving power to my hard drive or my CD drive if I decide to have one in this build. I routed this out the back and I plugged it into my hard drive. Be careful with this, as this may break, as one of my SATA connectors was broken. Here's a look at my cable management. I did nothing too fancy, I just used the cable management ties that were provided with the power supply and tied the cables to the back of the case. Since all my cable management was done, all I had to do was slide on the back once more, and this was a little difficult due to so many cables protruding out of the case, but once it was on for good, and I put in the thumb screws. I then did the same with the other side, but it was much easier due to the lack of cables coming out of this end. Last but not least, my favorite part. So satisfying. Here's my computer 4 months later with all its upgrades like mentioned before. I removed the case badge and added my initials to give it a personal touch, and added a Hyper 212 Evo CPU cooler, and an R9 285 graphics card to help me boost my performance when gaming, and a CX500 by Corsair. So thanks for watching this video. As I showed you, I built a $500 gaming computer and upgraded it to a $700 gaming computer. I hope you learned something like I did. I hope this video helps you make your own computer. Thanks for watching.